Today, we are covering the emotional drivers behind epilepsy. Last year, the World Health Organization estimated that around 50 million people worldwide have epilepsy. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, download, and comment. It really helps us continue to create all this great content for you, and it helps us know what kinds of topics you're most interested in hearing about. The Mayo Clinic says epilepsy happens as a result of abnormal electrical brain activity, also known as a seizure, kind of like an electrical storm inside of your head. Seizures happen because the patient's neurons are firing all at once, thereby disrupting the brain's normal network. According to the specialists at the Comprehensive Epilepsy Center at NYU, there are two main types of seizures: focal, which are also called partial seizures, and generalized. So first, let's talk about focal seizures. Focal seizures begin with an abnormal electrical discharge restricted to one small region of the brain. They are further categorized by the area of the brain in which they originate and their effect on consciousness, responsiveness, and memory. To me, where your seizures originate gives us information about the drivers behind the seizures. So, for focal seizures, there are four areas from which a seizure may originate. So, the first one is a temporal lobe seizure. Now, temporal lobe seizures are the most common type of epilepsy. The temporal lobe is located beneath the temples on either side of the head, and it's responsible for memory, emotions, interpreting sound, and understanding language. Seizures in the temporal lobe vary in intensity. They may be so mild that people barely even notice them. For example, a person may notice an odd feeling in their stomach or say that something smells funny. At other times, a person may feel consumed by feelings of fear, anxiety, or even a sense of déjà vu or a loss of reality. Another type of focal seizure is a frontal lobe seizure. Now, frontal lobe epilepsy is the second most common form of epilepsy, and it involves the frontal lobe, which is located behind the forehead and is responsible for movement, decision-making, problem-solving, and emotions. Depending on the area of the frontal lobe involved, symptoms may include night waking, thrashing, and bicycling movements of extremities. These seizures often occur at night during sleep. Another focal seizure is the occipital lobe seizures. And the occipital lobe sits at the back of the brain behind the parietal and temporal lobes. The occipital lobe is the site of the brain's visual system. Occipital lobe seizures account for 5% of all seizures experienced by people with or diagnosed with epilepsy. Occipital lobe seizures can begin with visual hallucinations, like flickering or colored lights. Symptoms may occur spontaneously, or they could possibly be triggered by visual stimuli, such as flashing lights or repeating patterns. Occipital seizures can sometimes be mistaken for migraine headaches because they cause similar symptoms like visual disturbances, sometimes partial blindness, extreme nausea, vomiting, headaches. Another type of focal seizure would be the parietal lobe seizure. Now, the parietal lobe seizures comprise only about 5% of all seizures experienced by people with epilepsy. The parietal lobe is located near the center of the brain, and that is the area responsible for processing information about touch, pain, space. From a mind change perspective, this can help give us some insight into how a person is representing the information that might be driving the epilepsy. We often refer to this within mind change as the representational systems. For instance, an occipital lobe seizure might give us the insight that the client is primarily holding or representing the driver visually. A frontal lobe seizure might indicate that someone is representing the trauma or the drivers in an audio-digital way. Now, all of that is more from a kind of higher level practitioner approach to these concerns. What I would like to present to you are the things and the informations about seizures that might inform what your particular drivers or particular areas of the brain are involved in your seizures to give you more information. So all of those things that we just discussed are categorized as focal type of seizures. The other type is generalized seizures. And those are seizures that arise from both hemispheres of the brain at the same time. And they're characteristic of a type of epilepsy that's been called primary generalized epilepsy or idiopathic generalized epilepsy. There are three main types of generalized seizures. So the first one we will cover is absence seizures. And absence seizures they were formerly known as petit mal seizures, and they are very brief and don't seem to cause the person to fall down or have significant shaking movements. Typically, absence seizures involve a sudden cessation of movement. So that means like someone might be staring, sometimes blinking, sometimes not blinking. There's sometimes a mild loss of muscle tone, and that could kind of cause someone to like lean forward or even backwards slightly. And these absence seizures usually last only 3 to 10 seconds. And there's usually no confusion before or after the seizure. Another type of generalized seizure would be the myoclonic seizure. And a myoclonic seizure causes brief shock-like jerking movements in muscles or groups of muscles. This type of seizure often involves jerking movements on both sides of the body at the same time. Epileptic syndromes that include myoclonic seizures usually begin in childhood. However, these seizures can occur at any age. So the last type of generalized seizure is a tonic-clonic seizure. So a generalized tonic-clonic seizure starts on both sides of the brain and then causes the body to stiffen, that's called the tonic phase, and then convulse or shake, which is known as the clonic phase. So there is something else called reflex epilepsy. And in reflex epilepsy, seizures are triggered by specific environmental stimuli. So for instance, flashing lights trigger a seizure, and that's something called a photosensitive epilepsy. But reflex epilepsy usually begins in childhood and is often outgrown by adulthood. Now, it is known that environmental triggers also can cause this type of epilepsy. That could be sounds. It's been said that something even like the ringing of church bells or a certain song, a certain type of music, maybe the sound of somebody's voice can actually prompt a seizure in adults with this type of epilepsy. For some people, even activities such as reading, writing, or solving math problems, or even thinking about a certain subject can provoke a seizure. So now that we've covered kind of the basic types of epilepsy and seizures, let's dive into some of the drivers. Now, from a macro perspective, seizures and epilepsy are about communication. At a foundational level in the brain, we have a person's neurons firing all at once. So that's an absolute overload of communication happening, so much to the degree that the brain short circuits. For many people, this was learned in childhood. Due to the environment that a child may have been raised in, there could have been a sense of persecution or extreme pressure, along with a feeling of great struggle. And if they didn't feel like they had an outlet for that or a place for that to be heard or exposed, then they are really being overloaded in their brain on a neurocircuitry level. and it's too much. They can't handle it. They haven't been given the tools to communicate their needs. Now, this may be because the adults or authority figures in their life didn't communicate or model communication in a healthy way. A person who does seizures or epilepsy may have suffered trauma as a result of influential people or primary caregivers losing control of their emotions when the person was a child. So also people who do epilepsy or seizures, as a child, they may have felt like they were expected to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders and that their families were severely dysfunctional. And at the same time, they were being told that, or they perceived that they were hearing that they couldn't do anything right and that they are actually the cause of everybody's problems. So this is unfortunately more common than we think, that due to a lack of emotional intelligence, and mostly that's coming from undealt with trauma in the life of the parents, the parents were never taught or modeled healthy communication. A lot of these parents are very dissociated from their body and their emotions anyway. And some of these parents rage. Some of these parents act out in the form of abuse. Some of these parents are involved in addiction or various other things. And the ask of that becomes that the child acts kind of like an adult. The child's being expected to handle these parents who are honestly acting like hurt, scared, wounded children. The children are almost asked to partake in caretaking of these adults. And so they do, and they rise up to that, and they feel this tremendous amount of responsibility. But as they walk forward into that role, what they're hearing from parents or primary caregivers or the people around them is that they can't do anything right. And I'm angry because of, child, what you are doing. And I wouldn't be screaming right now or hitting you right now if you wouldn't have done or said or been X, Y, or Z. And that causes a major overload in the circuitry of the brain. So along with that, it could be that too much was expected of you as a child. There may have been not such extreme things of abuse or rage or anger or anything like that, but it may have been that there was a performance conditional type of love, meaning that you had to do something or be someone worthy of love, usually through some form of performance, whether that be sports or grades or connection or the giving to the family, something in that way. And that usually comes from adults who do not know how to love themselves and therefore do not know how to give unconditional love to their children, try as they might. And that results in a rejection trauma for the child. In some other cases, a childhood driver could be that the mother may have been more of a taker than a giver, and therefore she couldn't be very nurturing due to the fact that she had such tremendous unmet needs within herself. That could show up like manipulation. It can show up like making the child feel guilty for taking so much from her being the mother. So this sometimes happens with mothers who didn't get a lot of nurturing or care or love themselves as children. And they have children thinking they're going to do it different, but realize they are not sourcing, they have nothing to source from. And so when the great amount of needs that a child brings into the world, as they well should, when the mother feels unable to take care of that child, rather than deal with what's going on inside of her and figure that out, she will often shift the blame to the child being more needy than it should be, motherhood being harder than it was supposed to be, possibly a spouse not supporting in the way they are, or in general, the world not showing up for her in the way it should. And therefore, she ends up in a taking relationship with her children rather than the giving, nurturing relationship that a mother has with children in their early childhood development. Now, if the epilepsy appears in childhood, it could be something that's further exacerbating the feeling of being incapable or unworthy. So many children and adults who go on to develop epilepsy will feel like they are broken-brained, like there's something fundamentally that they can't do or can't get that seems like other people can. And they'll actually feel it in their minds. There's the incongruency is so strong, it can be felt in the brain, and it can cause actual pain and stress in the brain. Now, the brain can't actually feel pain, but the thoughts happening in the brain are so strong and so painful that the body perceives it as pain. And when that happens, when someone feels like they're broken-brained, that often fuels a belief that's already there that they are unfit or unworthy of being loved. Another common driver is that as a child, you may have been pushed too hard during childhood in the sense that there was no room for error. So mistakes were met with severe reactions and consequences, even if it was the slightest misstep. This can happen sometimes it happens in the way that a child learns when maybe eating or cleaning so if they spill on accident, they drop a cup, they break something, which is all actually quite normal in the development of a child, that there will be a very strong reaction from a caregiver and a strong reaction that doesn't necessarily meet the circumstance that happened. And over time, the child starts to, in a way, glitch at the thought of even making a mistake. And that becomes this overwhelm in the brain. Because to learn, children need to make mistakes. They are often messy, and because they still don't have the brain development yet. Oftentimes they're juggling way too many things, whether that be expectations of parents at home, siblings, school, now the online presence, which is already creating some difficulties within brain development. So for these children, the brain packing all of that in there, if they are unable to make a mistake, if they're constantly putting that much pressure on themselves, that causes a massive overwhelm in the synapses of the brain. Now, all of these things or more could have led to a child feeling painfully sensitive to criticism, so that even the slightest sense of disappointment or failure will overwhelm the brain, leaving somebody upset, angry, or resentful. But if the child didn't have clarity, or it wasn't modeled for them how they should communicate or deal with big emotions, then these children tend to turn them inward. Instead of acting out on them, they get turned inward, and then it starts this feedback loop in the brain, creates a lot of energy, a lot of electricity in the brain, because these big emotions have nowhere else to go. And they're being held so tightly that this can often start with headaches or pain behind the eyes. Sometimes, depending on what type of seizure ends up being had, it can really give us communication into how a child is representing what they're either seeing or feeling or hearing or knowing in a situation. Now, epilepsy seizures could also be trauma-related in the sense of sexual abuse, physical abuse, or emotional abuse in the immediate family, but sometimes also in ancestry. Sometimes epigenetically, these things skip generations. And what might be representing in the child is actually coming from a grandparent or someone further back in their lineage. Another driver is that as a child, you might have felt highly guilty. and felt like fitting in or being good was a constant struggle. There could have been a major separation in childhood from someone who was deeply important to you. And this could have been through something like a death or a divorce or even a significant move away from loved ones. Now, in this manifestation, there's often a masculine component to this, like the relationship with your father, who, in the case of either death, divorce, or various other situations, if the father was no longer around to be close to and do things together with the child would have perceived this as to being their fault. And that then contributes to probably a program that is already there of self-rejection, brokenness, and hatred. So basically, all of these situations and more get stored up in the brain. And the more emotions that are suppressed, the more explosive the shutdown or the disconnect, which would be the seizure, would be. Now, if the epilepsy is adult onset, it's often because the coping mechanisms that you've used thus far in life to get through are no longer working. And they used to work, and it used to feel like that it helped you move from one thing to another, but really they've just been band-aids. So eventually this stuff starts to build up, and then boils over in the form of epilepsy or seizures. So here are some of the markers and drivers that we see in adults doing epilepsy. So there's a deep underlying fear that you might lose control and hurt someone, even though you maybe don't have a history of violence at all whatsoever. You feel overwhelmed by life and the pressure to meet society's expectations. There's a constant anxiety about not being good enough, not being capable enough, that you're not able to actually handle things the way that other people seem to handle things. But there's so many people relying on you. These people often feel out of their depth, like they uniquely are falling behind or being judged by other people. And that causes a lot of frustration and anger about their situation. Those intense emotional reactions they experience are a mix of fear and resentment as they struggle to manage these feelings. So all of these feelings build up. They perceive that they have all this pressure and all this judgment, all these expectations of the people around them, that they show up, that they provide, that they do things right, and again, these are all childhood stories, but adults don't generally realize that. And then the frustration and anger that would come with feeling so pressured doesn't go out. It comes in and it gets held and it builds and builds and builds until the brain cannot handle it anymore and needs a timeout, and it short circuits and we have a seizure. Now, these people tend to be really hard on themselves. They often feel the need to punish themselves emotionally or mentally. And let me tell you, that is often really subconscious. They don't realize they're doing it at the moment. And for a lot of them, this was so normal for them as children, this sort of needing to be punished or being punished, that when they're doing it to themselves as an adults, it doesn't even seem weird. It seems so normal, so they don't even realize that they're doing that. So this leads them to engage in self-destructive behaviors. So whether that's through negative self-talk or sabotaging their own well-being, or even behaviors that are self-harming like drug or alcohol abuse. They just want to escape or shut down, hoping to avoid any more demands or expectations on them. And again, that often comes from growing up in a family that there was a lot of criticism, belittling, blame, making the child feel as though they were responsible for major problems, even the things that were beyond their control. Now, these people often self-sabotage as a way of giving up because they desire to run away from everything. So that can be running away from themselves, what's really going on inside of them, their families, their job, or just life in general. So the demands of life feel like too much for them to handle. And deep inside, what's really going on is they doubt their ability to cope or manage anything. So it for them, it feels like what they do, what they're able to do has been a bit of a front. And it's like they're carrying more than they can handle anyway. That's their perception. So anything added to that, any more expectation, responsibility, judgment, criticism, it's like they have no support whatsoever. And they don't have a sense that things will get better. And so that leaves them feeling completely overwhelmed. So they don't have the resources to handle what's happening outside of them, partially because they don't feel like they have the resources to handle what's happening inside of them. These people may also be carrying a lot of emotional weight, and life feels like it's always throwing obstacles your way: rejection, anger, hopelessness. It's kind of like this constant need to fight. Like you've got to somehow fight harder than others. Your life is harder. More terrible things happen to you, one thing after another. You don't have the same tools or gifts or privilege that other people do. And so you fight and fight and fight. And that feels exhausting. And it seems like you're always on guard. You're always just waiting, feeling persecuted and guilty. And there's aggression that gets built up from that, even though you try to suppress it. So there's all this aggression coming out, and at the same time, you're holding back a flood of other emotions that want to be expressed, and it's creating a lot of inner turmoil. Another possible driver is that there's uncertainty in your mind. You can't necessarily get everything figured out, and so, but you're trying to all the time. Somehow you just think, if I could just figure it all out, if I could just get it all in line or in order, that then it's just a constant stream of thoughts. It's almost like it never shuts off, but they never seem to line up, and it's all jumbled. And it's something that it's like a puzzle piece you need to keep trying to put together that's not fitting, and you just keep trying over and over again. And that feeling adds to the instability that you're experiencing, and then starts to influence all the other things that you've got your hands in. So then it creates instability in relationships, instability in your work, instability in your finances. And it can sometimes feel like you're just trapped. You're trapped in your own life. You may feel that you're forced to submit to others, as if your freedom is being taken away from you over and over again. There's an overwhelming sense of being controlled by something bigger than you, and the need to fight against an unknown enemy. And it makes you feel so out of control. Now, that constant pressure builds up inside of you. So it's no surprise that your body reacts to this emotional overload. It reaches a breaking point where the anguish you're feeling is so intense that it's hard to maintain any sense of control over your thoughts and actions. And obviously that describes pretty clearly what a seizure is like, is that there's no sense of control. There's no ability to control. Your body has taken over completely. Another way of looking at this is that there's this considerable amount of overload that often comes because you're someone that, as a coping mechanism, tends to exaggerate events in your mind. Now, the exaggeration isn't conscious. It's a mechanism for protection. And that's because you tend to be so self-critical and so self-violent that it's often a better option to feel like the victim, and that the real problem is the people around you, or the world around you, or something outside of you that you feel like you had no control over. So that makes you feel frustrated and upset by the people around you. So very often that results in making judgments about other people. So you will feel like people are stupid, they're clueless, or they're less than. And remember, this is a defense mechanism. It's an unconscious defense mechanism, but it leads you to feel like you're superior, You'll come off arrogant. You'll act like you know better than everybody else. And there's a lot of anger and resentment focused on the people in your environment. But really, this is just to avoid the way that you feel about yourself. Another driver here is that instead of listening to your deep wisdom, to your intuition, and living in the present moment, you live in your head. You give priority to your thoughts and attempts to control or fix your environment rather than figuring yourself out. After time, your brain overheats because you focus your attention too much on the thoughts, the memories, the stories you have created. And that doesn't allow you to live in the moment and in your body. It's almost as if you have to keep telling these same stories and reliving these memories over and over again to stay angry or to stay in this fight system or to stay in this kind of victimized place. Because to face yourself, if the way you feel about yourself is so poor, that feels like the greater of two evils. Now, it is important to remember that the body is always for us. And as difficult as a seizure disorder can be, it does come with a message and is meant to serve you. So here are some of the ways that a seizure actually serves the deeper need of the subconscious mind. If the feelings of overwhelm and emotional pain become too much, and you're having difficulty even thinking straight, your mind may need you to disconnect from everything, even losing consciousness at times. And maybe, in fact, especially losing consciousness. So these people are often very stuck in their conscious mind, stuck in their thoughts, stuck in the way that they see things, feel things, hear things, but from a mind perspective only. And that's these loss of consciousness, loss of awareness from a conscious perspective. It's actually the body's way of protecting itself from the overwhelming pressure and from the difficult relationships and situations that you keep repeating in your mind, that you keep playing over and over and over again. And you just need to shut down, give yourself a break, catch your breath. And the seizure provides that. Now, that could cause the smaller versions of seizures where there's a loss of consciousness for just a few seconds, or like a petit mal or absent seizure. And that indicates that you need to escape from a situation or a mindset because you perceive that your life or that your responsibilities are too much to handle. Now, for others who are really good at being their own worst critic, there's a part of you that feels like you deserve punishment and that you need to treat yourself harshly. This could come in the form of, as a child, hearing or something like, hey, the only way to get through to you is through a spanking or through punishment. Like you wouldn't listen otherwise. And the child internalizes this, that somehow the only way that we will listen is to be dealt with harshly or abusively. And, this can come from a way to like correct behavior. So if it was also said in that, like we need to, this painful punishment is actually a way to correct your behavior. Well, even though that you're an adult, you're actually using the same tactic on yourself that was used, I would argue, unsuccessfully in childhood. So these seizures may be more violent in nature, and they can even inflict harm upon the body. Epilepsy, in a way, shows you that your life is overloaded, that the demands and struggles that you feel and that you perceive are just taking up too much space in your mind. Even the feeling of being overwhelmed might come from exaggerations or misperceptions that you've blown out of proportion in your mind, partially because that's where you're stuck. And that's what you keep doing over and over and over again. The more you focus on them, the more that they seem bigger and scarier than they really are. Now, you might be someone who tries to control everything and everyone around you, but that only causes your body to lose control as a way to remind you that the only thing you can truly control is yourself. Seizures can also be a way to draw attention to unmet needs or to indicate that there are severe, unhealed wounds deep within, things that you weren't able to protest or fight back on when you were a child. So when you have a seizure, your body tenses and stiffens as if it's going through the motions of protesting these injuries. The convulsions actually allow your body to break free of the stiff and rigid way that you live in your mind. And it actually releases some of the anger and the bitterness and the frustration that you've been holding on to for so long. It's almost as if your body is giving you no choice now, but to let go and finally feel these intense emotions. But it has to get your conscious mind offline, and it can feel like a release. And through the seizure, your body is trying to tell the people around you just how much you need love and attention. The seizures are a way of escaping the pain, fear, and anger that you're carrying. Seizures might also be tied to a deep fear that you have. And again, sometimes these are unconscious and subconscious. It could be a fear of death, fear of illness, fear of losing someone important to you, or it could be the only way your body feels that it can express a boundary. It's like your body doesn't want to move forward, almost as if it's trying to stop you from facing a difficult situation or doing something that you say that you want to do, but deep down you really don't want to do it, but you feel like you have to do it. So what I'd like to do now is get into some very specific drivers for the kinds of seizures that someone might be experiencing. So we're going to kind of break these down. So for an absence seizure, at one of the generalized times, there's a feeling of extreme vulnerability, and it's like you need help on a foundational level. So oftentimes this is an inner child crying out, like, I just want my mommy, or you're trying to seize someone's attention who's important to you to try to help you, to try to give you what you didn't get as a child. An atonic seizure, another generalized version of seizures, is fear that you may never get to the place that you want to be in life, or the feeling that you would rather be anywhere but where you are right now. A clonic seizure, another generalized version, is a desperate need or desire to divert attention from what's happening in the present moment. It could be an actual event, but it could be also something that you're doing in your head or replaying again and again subconsciously. A tonic seizure, again, generalized, comes from being deeply troubled about the current situation in your life, but rather than change it, you've just given up. You're just giving up to it. And that would be because of a belief or a felt experience that no one ever listens to me. Nobody really cares about me anyway. So the only way out of this, the only way to be seen, have me considered is through this particular type of seizure. Now, a frontal lobe seizure, which is a focal seizure, the driver for that is being deeply caught up in thought loops. You're having a hard time focusing on what's real and what the real problem is, and you're getting all tangled up in the story your mind has made up around the situation. Now, you just want to escape because dealing with it seems too big, and because of the looping in your mind, you don't really know what you're going after in the first place. Another focal type of seizure is the occipital lobe seizure, and this driver is that you are someone who has difficulty dealing with or recognizing your emotions. So when things build up too much, you begin to feel trapped. So your mind and your body opt to blank out and do a reset in order to avoid the pain of the buildup. Another focal type of seizure, the temporal lobe seizure, the driver for that one specifically is it might be attached to a victim mindset. So that's feeling frustrated because it seems like no one ever agrees with you. You never get your way. Life is more challenging for you than others. You don't have the same amount of tools. You don't have the same amount of money. You don't have the same amount of support to get what other people are getting. And this type of seizure happens as an effort to reset your mindset and recalibrate your thoughts. Though very few people are aware of what the body is asking. And so then the seizures are just viewed as another way that you are being victimized, that you have something wrong that other people don't. Now, for people who've experienced a seizure but didn't receive an epilepsy diagnosis, or you received an epilepsy diagnosis but had no other seizure events to correspond with an epilepsy diagnosis, you may have experienced what's called a psychogenic non-epileptic seizure. And so for those people, the driver there is that you've been unconsciously or subconsciously holding yourself back from reaching out for assistance in processing something that's deeply traumatic that's happened to you. So there's a traumatic life experience, and it's something that is wreaking havoc on you, probably from a subconscious point of view. And you may have even know that you need help. You may have been told that you need help, but the resistance in reaching out and getting the help that you need results in a seizure. Okay, so that's a lot about seizures and epilepsy, but I think it's important to understand that seizures might be urging you to wake up and stop living in the mental prison of fear and negativity. It might be communicating your need to let go of the desire to control everything and instead embrace life more fully and spontaneously. They may be asking you to stop focusing on all the negative aspects and see the love and beauty that life offers you. It might be asking you to stop being so hard on yourself and to open up to others. Though these moments of uncontrollable release are happening, your body is trying to help you see that you can free yourself from your trauma and start living more authentically. There is hope. Once the messages have been properly translated and received, we often know exactly where to go to resolve the drivers. Resolve the message, and it will often resolve the way the body needed to communicate. All right, that wraps up our drivers for today. I look forward to seeing you every other week as we continue to dive into the Emotional Driver series. Please make sure to continue to leave those 5-star reviews and comment if there is a disease, symptom, or ailment you would like to hear covered. As a reminder, you can sign up for the podcast newsletter and get 10% off private one-to-one sessions with one of our qualified practitioners. Until next time, thanks for joining us on the Mind Change podcast, where we are changing the world, one mind at a time.